Hello, my name is Stephen Allan and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Kent, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Kent Research Partnership Research and Training Fellowships, and more particularly around the design of your study when you're considering the use of quantitative data. Before getting on to quantitative data analysis and the things you will need to consider, a funding disclaimer, and this is basically just outlining that the views expressed here are mine and mine alone, and not necessarily those of those who are funding the work. What is quantitative research? Quantitative research is the use of data to answer research questions. The data might already exist. For example, it might be firm level data or government administrative data, or it might need to be collected, for example using a survey. You might have a research question in mind already that's going to require quantitative data analysis to answer. So some examples of research questions: what has been the effect of a change in policy? What is the effect of a wage increase on staff retention in social care? And does the use of digital software improve the outcomes of those receiving social care services? So the level of detail increases as we move down those research questions. The first is very general, and so potentially could be answered using qualitative and quantitative research methods. The second is going to be more effective to answer using quantitative research methods, but there is the potential you could look at the changes in staff behaviours through a wage increase using qualitative research, if that was what you're interested in. And so it might require a slight tweak in that question. The third is only going to really be answerable using quantitative data research, because you need to look at how the use of digital software by staff and companies providing services to those receiving social care services improves the outcomes of those receiving the social care services. What are the different types of quantitative research? Well, there are four main types: descriptive, correlational, causal, and experimental. I'm now going to go through each of those in turn using the same research idea and see how the research question develops through those types of quantitative research. So the first is descriptive, so you examine the current status of an area. So what are the levels of staff wage and quality in care homes? We could look at the current levels, or we could look at change over time. But that's going to be a descriptive examination of a certain specific area. Correlational is establishing the relationship between two or more variables. So what is the relationship between staff wage and care home quality? So here we can say, do care homes with higher staff wage have higher quality? That would establish a relationship, but wouldn't be able to say, does a higher staff wage cause higher care home quality? In types 3 and 4 of quantitative research, causal and experimental research, we could establish the cause and effect relationships. So with 3, what impact does staff wage have on care home quality? Here, to do this, we'd need to either have a natural experiment where one local authority has an increase in wage for care home staff and another local authority doesn't, or look at changes over time between wage and care home quality, and control for other factors that could influence that relationship. So what other factors could influence that relationship, such as the sector that the care home is in? Are they not-for-profit? Are they for-profit? Experimental research is very much like causal research, except for it's using an experiment such as a randomised controlled trial. So how does a wage increase impact on care home quality? And another example, how does a new training programme affect staff retention in care homes? So here, with a randomised controlled trial, or RCT, it is the researchers who introduce the experiment into the care homes, and so some care homes will have the wage increase or the new training programme, whereas a control number of care homes will not have the wage increase and not have the training programme, and then you control for everything else about those care homes and see what the effects are of a wage increase or a new training programme. Now, for the fellowships that you are considering applying for, these are small springboard projects, and so you'll probably be only looking at type 1 or 2 of quantitative research, so the descriptive analysis or a correlational analysis establishing the relationship between some variables. But you could potentially think about using type 3 or 4 in a future research project. Now, data collection. You're going to need data to answer your research question. So what data will you need? And more specifically, what is the best way to answer this question? So if you think back to my original 3 research questions, what is the best way to answer that question? Or if you're looking at the impact of staff wage on care home quality, what data do I need to answer that question? There are 2 main types of data. There is primary data and secondary data. Primary data is data collected specifically to answer your own research question. So that could come via survey or telephone interviews. Secondary data is data which has already been gathered for another purpose and which you can then use to answer a research question. So that might be government administrative data, data collected by the Office for National Statistics. It might be company data on staff or people that are supported by their services. Or it might be local or national surveys, such as Understanding Society. There will also be costs involved in data collection. So some data might be available for research for free. So, for example, government administrative data, data from the Office for National Statistics, that may be available for free and publicly available. Other secondary data is only going to be available at a cost. And so you need to consider that in costing your application. Also, certain data sets may require data sharing agreements, and so this is an agreement between yourself as the researcher and the data holder about what you can and can't do with the data. So how long you're going to have this data for, what are the explicit purposes that you're using this data for. It could also be to do with data storage. So with a hard copy of data, it used to be that where you're going to store it, is it under lock and key in a filing cabinet in a locked office? And it's the same idea for data that's held on computer networks now. How secure is that data? And there'll be a level of security that will be agreed between the researcher and the data holder. Primary data collection is going to involve greater costs, certainly usually. So let's consider a survey. This is going to require research time in the preparation and design of the survey. You also need to consider how the survey is going to be administered. So is it going to be online, which may be cheaper, but there might be a cost to hosting it online. Is it going to be postal, in which case there's going to be postage costs and printing costs. And you also need to consider at this stage what the sample size is going to be. Is it going to be a survey of staff across 5 care homes, or is it going to be you're going to survey all care home staff in Kent? And so that's going to have an impact on costs as well in terms of your sample size. And there might be other costs to consider. Do you want to offer an incentive for completing the survey? Is there going to be a follow-up survey? So those who complete the first survey are invited to complete a second survey. So there's a lot of costs to consider when developing a survey. And so you need to think carefully about this in terms of your application for this Research and Training Fellowship, because we're going to fund small springboard projects. So if you're thinking about a survey, it's probably going to need to be a small survey. Is that possible? And with secondary data, can you get that data for free, or is there a small cost? What is that cost? And so you need to include those in your application. Analysing the data. Once you've got your data collected, how do you analyse it? Well, usually this is going to be using statistical research methods. So for example, regression analysis, where you look to see what the effect of one variable is on another, holding other variables constant. And you need to test your hypothesis. So we've been talking about the effects of higher wages in care homes on care home quality. So your hypothesis may be, does a wage increase lead to better quality in a care home? And you'll be testing that hypothesis. And you'll be using statistical software to do this. So for example, some statistical software packages that are available include Stata, SPSS and R. And these may have a cost to use. So the University of Kent does have licensing agreements on some of these, so you need to consider that in your application. And think about the skills you would need to answer your research question and analysing the data. Ethics. You'll need to consider ethics with your research proposal. Does your research proposal involve collecting information from vulnerable groups? Data collection that could be time consuming to the participant? Or does it involve collecting confidential data such as personal information or data from a business? If yes, you're going to need to consider the ethics of the research. You will apply to a research ethics board to ensure that the research will not harm individuals in any way. Analysis of anonymised secondary data is not normally going to require ethical approval, may involve the data sharing agreement I previously mentioned, and you need to consider the availability of identifying individuals accidentally. So if you're looking at low numbers of something, so if there was only a few care home staff who had a wage increase in any 1 year, would you be in danger of identifying those staff in any way, even though the data is anonymised? And you also need to consider, does your proposal involve collecting data from a local authority? If yes, you're going to need research governance approval from that local authority. Resources and training. What resources and training might you need to be able to answer your research question and help you to develop your research career in the future? So think about, do you need a specific textbook or statistical package? Do you need to learn about survey methods because your research is going to involve a large survey in the future? Do you need to acquire statistical analysis skills? Do you need to learn about ethics? Think about which element of training is going to be most beneficial to you. Potentially include one or two of them together, combine. Look for example courses that would be appropriate, such as online, and include the cost of these in your funding application. So that's a very brief overview of using quantitative data in your research. As a reminder, in terms of your application for the Training and Research Fellowship, the application form and detailed guidance notes are available on glass cubes. And if you do have any other questions, please ask. Our researchers in residence are happy to discuss your ideas, Wenjing, Vanessa and Lily, and you can contact them at the email address shown, kentresearchpartnership@kent.ac.uk. And good luck with your application. I wish you well. Thank you.